The Night of Milky Way Train. Kenji Miyazawa. 9. Giovanni's Ticket. This is the end of Swan District. Look, that's the famous Albireo Observatory. Outside the window, there was a Milky Way that looked as if it was filled with fireworks. In the middle of it, there were 4 large black buildings. On top of one of them, there were 2 big transparent balls. One ball was made of blue sapphire and the other of yellow topaz. They were quietly turning. As the yellow ball went round to the back, the smaller blue ball came to the front. Then their edges would form a beautiful green double lens. The center would get bigger, and then the blue ball would move in front of the yellow one. Now there was a green center with a bright yellow ring around it. Then the balls moved off to the side again. The double lens appeared again. Then the balls separated. The sapphire ball went round to the back, and the topaz ball moved to the front. The black observatory seemed to be sleeping quietly in the middle of the silent water of the Milky Way. The birdcatcher started talking again. That's a machine that measures the speed of water. You see, the water. I'll take a look at your ticket. Tall conductor in a red cap had suddenly appeared. He was standing very straight beside them. The bird catcher silently took out a small piece of paper from his secret pocket. The conductor looked at it and then turned towards Giovanni and Campanella. He put his hand out and moved his fingers, as if saying, "How about your tickets?" Campanella pulled out a small gray ticket at once. "Well, said Giovanni. He didn't know what to do. He put his hand into his jacket pocket, hoping there might be something there. To his surprise, he felt a large piece of paper. He quickly pulled it out. It was a piece of green paper folded in quarters about the size of a postcard. Giovanni handed it to the conductor. "I've no idea where this came from," he thought, "but maybe anything will do." And when he handed it over, the conductor stood up straight and carefully opened it and looked at it. He played with the buttons on his jackets as he read it. The lighthouse keeper looked at it with interest from below. So Giovanni thought. It must have been a certificate or something. And he felt a little hot. "Have you come here with this ticket from the 3rd dimension?" asked the conductor. I don't know," replied Giovanni. Feeling safe now, he looked up at the conductor and smiled. "Thank you very much, sir," said the conductor. "We will be arriving at the Southern Cross around the next 3 o'clock. He gave the paper back to Giovanni and walked off. Campanella looked at the paper as if he couldn't wait to find out what it was. Giovanni really wanted to know, too. It was covered with a black pattern. And there were around 10 strange letters on it as well. As he stared at it, Giovanni felt as if he was going to be sucked into it. Then the bird catcher glanced at it from the side and said in a panic, "Hey, this is quite something. This ticket will even take you to the real heaven. And not just that. It's a pass allowing you to go anywhere you like." "Ah, I see now. With that, you can go wherever you want on this 4th dimension fantasy, the Milky Way line. You two are really something, aren't you?" "I don't really understand," replied Giovanni, his face going red. Then he folded it up and put it in his pocket. Feeling uneasy, he looked out of the window again with Campanella. He could feel the birdcatcher looking over at him from time to time. He seemed to think Giovanni was someone important. "It's almost time for the eagle stop," said Campanella. He was comparing the map with the three little pale triangles on the far bank. Giovanni suddenly felt very sorry for the birdcatcher sitting next to him. He didn't know why. He was so happy to catch those herons, he said to himself. And he wrapped them carefully in the white cloth, and he saw my ticket and looked surprised, and started saying nice things about us. He knew nothing about the birdcatcher, but now he felt he wanted to give him everything he owned and all his food. "I wouldn't mind standing on the shining riverbed of the Milky Way for 100 years and catching birds for him if he could become really happy. I must ask him what he really wants. Would it be all right to do that?" Giovanni turned towards the birdcatcher, but he was no longer there. And his white bundle had gone from the rack, too. Giovanni thought he might have gone outside again, looking up at the sky ready to catch more snowy herons. He quickly looked out of the window, but he couldn't see the birdcatcher's broad back or his pointed hat. All he could see were beautiful waves of sand and white pampas grass. "I wonder where he's gone," said Campanella. "I wonder, too. Will we ever see him again? Why didn't I talk to him a little more? I feel the same. When he was here, I felt he was a nuisance. So now I feel bad." Giovanni had never felt like that before. "And I've never said anything like that before," he thought. "It kind of smells of apples in here," said Campanella. He looked around the car in wonder. "Is that because I've just been thinking about apples?" "No, there really is a smell of apples," said Giovanni. "I can smell wild roses, too." He also looked around, but the smell seemed to be coming from outside. "But it's autumn," thought Giovanni. "There shouldn't be the scent of roses in autumn." At that moment, a boy appeared next to them. He had shiny black hair and looked about 6 years old. He wasn't wearing any shoes, and the buttons on his red jacket were not done up. He stood there shivering with a very surprised look on his face. Next to him was a tall young man wearing black clothes. He was holding the boy's hand. He looked like a tree standing firm in a strong wind. Next to the young man was a girl about 12 years old. "Oh, where are we?" "It's beautiful," said the girl. She was a pretty girl with brown eyes, wearing a cloak and standing behind the young man. She was clinging to her young man's arm and looking out the window curiously. "Ah, this must be Lancashire," replied the young man. "No, I think it's Connecticut. Oh, we've come to the sky. We're going to heaven." His face was full of joy as he spoke. "Look. That marks the sign of heaven. There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. We've been called by God." Then suddenly lines appeared on his face. He looked very tired. He forced himself to smile and sat the little boy down next to Giovanni. He then looked at the girl and gently pointed to the seat next to Campanella. She sat down at once with her hands together in front of her. The young man sat down by the lighthouse keeper. "I want to go to where Kikuyo is," the boy said with a strange look on his face. The boy said to the young man who had just sat on the other side of the lighthouse guard, The young man said nothing. He looked very sad as he stared at the boy's wet curly hair. Suddenly the girl started crying. She put both hands over her face. "Your father and sister Kikuyo still have a lot of work to do," said the young man. "But they'll soon follow us. What's more important is to think how long your mother has been waiting for you. While she's been waiting, I'm sure she's been wondering what kind of songs her dear Tadashi is singing now. Wondering if he's playing on a snowy morning, going around the bushes holding hands with his friends. So let's hurry and see her, shall we?" "Yes. But I wish I hadn't gone on that ship." "Well, yes. But look over there. See? How about that? It's that great white river. We could always see it from the window in the summer, couldn't we? When you went to bed singing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.' Well, that's it right there. See how beautiful it is. See how much it's shining." Her crying sister also wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and looked out. "We no longer need to be sad," the young man went on softly. "We're traveling through this nice place. And we'll soon arrive at the place where God is. It will be really bright and smell good and be filled with fine people. Those who got on the boats instead of us will all have been saved. They'll go back home where their parents are waiting for them. It won't take long now. So let's be cheerful and sing some happy songs together." The young man stroked the boy's wet hair. As he spoke to the children, the color returned to his face. "And where have you come from?" asked the lighthouse keeper. "What happened to you?" He sounded as if he understood. "Well," the young man replied with a little smile. "Our ship hit an iceberg and sank. The mother of these children died the year before last. Their father had to go back to his home country over 2 months ago on sudden business. We left later to follow him. I was a university student and their private teacher. But on the 12th day, today, or maybe yesterday, the ship hit an iceberg. There was some moonlight, but it was very foggy. It lifted right up out of the water and began to sink. Half of the lifeboats on one side were damaged, and, of course, the other lifeboats couldn't hold everyone. As the ship went lower in the water, I shouted out, 'Please let these young children get on the boat.' Some people made way for us and started praying for the children. But between where we were and the lifeboat there were some other young children and their parents. However, I felt it was my duty to try to save these children. So I almost tried to push away the ones in front of us. But, at the same time, I also thought it would be real happiness for us all to go to meet God together as we were. That seemed better than trying to save them by doing something bad to other people. Then I thought I could accept the blame for my actions and save them. But I just couldn't do it. It was terrible to watch, all the children in the lifeboats, their mothers on the ship screaming and blowing them kisses, and their fathers standing up straight and trying not to show their sadness. The ship was sinking deeper and deeper. Then I made up my mind. I would hold these 2 children and wait for the ship to go down. Then we would try to float as long as we could. Somebody threw a lifebelt towards us, I don't know who it was. But we couldn't hold on to it. It went too far away from us. I didn't know what to do next. The 3 of us grabbed the railing and hung on to it. Suddenly we heard a voice shouting out the number of a hymn. At once everyone started singing it together in various languages. Just then there was a loud noise, and we were thrown into the water. Realizing we were caught in a whirlpool, I hung firmly on to these two. The next thing I knew, we were here. I'm sure the people on the lifeboats were saved. There were some very good sailors rowing them. They were getting away quickly from the sinking ship. Some of the travelers in the car seemed to be praying. Giovanni and Campanella were close to tears. They were remembering lots of things they'd forgotten till then. Ah, thought Giovanni, maybe that ship was on the big ocean called the Pacific. Up in the north, the water's very cold and there are many icebergs. Just think, right now some people are working there fighting against the wind and the cold. I feel really sorry for them. What can I do to make them happy? He hung his head low. He felt very miserable. Then the lighthouse keeper started speaking to him. We don't really know what happiness is. The important thing is to move along the right path. Then any difficult thing, whether you are going up or coming down a mountain, is a step towards finding real happiness? Ah, yes, said the young man. All the hard things on the way to real happiness are the will of God. The young boy and his sister had already fallen fast asleep in their seats. Their feet had been bare when they appeared on the train. But now they were wearing soft white shoes. The train went on and on beside the shining river. The view through the window on the other side of the car was just like a picture in a frame. There were hundreds, thousands of triangular signposts of various sizes. At the top of the bigger ones, there were flags with red spots on them. There were so many of them in the far distance, they looked like a pale mist. From the same place, or maybe even further away, things like signal fires rose now and then. They were in various shapes and a beautiful blue color. The scent of roses filled the air. It was brought to them by the clean, clear breeze. How about one of these? Asked the lighthouse keeper. It may be the first time for you to taste this kind of apple. He now had some large red and gold apples. He was holding them carefully with both hands so that he wouldn't drop them. Oh, they look great, said the young man, sounding surprised. Where did they come from? Can you grow apples like that around here? He was staring at them with his head to one side. Well, yes. Please try one. The young man took an apple. Then the lighthouse keeper looked at Giovanni and Campanella. Now, you young lads, how about you? Please take one. Giovanni said nothing. He didn't like being called a young lad. But Campanella said, "Thank you." The young man took 2 more apples and handed them over to the 2 boys. Giovanni stood up and thanked him. The lighthouse keeper had his hands free at last. He gently put an apple on the laps of the sleeping brother and sister. "Thank you so much," said the young man, staring down at his apple. "Where are such lovely apples grown?" "Well, of course, there is some farming in this area. But mostly good apples are supposed to grow by themselves, you know. So farming is not such hard work. In most cases, if you sow the seeds of whatever you want, they'll grow by themselves. Take rice, for example. It doesn't have husks like the rice grown around the Pacific. The grains are 10 times bigger and they taste very good. And the apples and sweets don't produce any waste. They produce a little scent that comes out through your skin. It's different for each person. But there's no farming in the area you're heading to. Suddenly, the little boy opened his eyes wide. Oh, he said, I was dreaming about Mother. She was sitting in a nice place with lots of books. She looked at me and put out her hands. And she smiled and smiled and smiled. When I said, Mommy, shall I go and pick some apples for you? I woke up. Ah, we're still in the same train, aren't we? You have an apple there, said the young man. It was a present from this man. Thank you, sir, said the boy. Oh, Keiru's still asleep. I'll wake her up. Keiru. Look, we have some apples. Wake up. Keiru woke up smiling. She put both hands over her eyes because of the bright light. Then she looked at her apple. Her brother had already started eating his, just as if he were eating a pie. He had carefully peeled it. As the peel came off, it glowed gray. But it disappeared before it reached the floor. Giovanni and Campanella carefully put their apples into their pockets. They could now see a big wood on the other side of the river. The branches were heavy with fruit. It was round and shining red. A very tall triangular signpost stood in the middle of the wood. A beautiful sound was coming from the wood on the breeze. It seemed to melt into your mind. The young man's body shook. The others listened to the music without speaking. It sounded as if a bright carpet of yellow and light green had been spread all around. Oh, look, cried the girl. Crows. They're not crows, they're magpies, replied Campanella as though he was telling her off. Giovanni couldn't help laughing. The girl's face went red. In the pale light from the river, they could see many blackbirds quietly perched in a row. Ah, yes, they're magpies, said the young man. You can tell by the feathers sticking out at the back of their heads. The train was now in line with the tall signpost in the wood. Just then, they heard the sound of singing coming from the back of the train. It sounded as if many people were singing a hymn in chorus. The young man suddenly went pale and stood up. He looked as if he was going to go towards the sound. But he changed his mind and sat down again. Keiru held her handkerchief to her face. Even Giovanni felt a kind of tickle in his nose. More and more people seemed to be joining in. The sound of the hymn got clearer and stronger. Suddenly, Giovanni and Campanella started singing as well. Then the beautiful sound from the wood faded away. All that could now be heard were the wind and the train. Ah, there's a lyrebird, cried the little boy suddenly. Oh yes, there are lots of them, replied the girl. The wood now looked as small as a green button. Giovanni could see the reflection of a pale shining light as the lyrebirds spread and closed their tails above it. That's right. I even heard them calling, Campanella said to Keiru. Yes, she replied, they sounded like harps playing, didn't they? I'm sure there were about 30 of them. Giovanni suddenly felt sad again. He wanted to say, Campanella, shall we get off here and have some fun? The river had now divided into two. On the dark island in the middle, there was a very tall tower. A man wearing a red hat was standing on top of it looking up at the sky. He was holding red and blue flags and sending signals with them. For a while, he kept waving the red flag. Then suddenly, he lowered it and held it behind his back. Then he raised the blue flag much higher up and waved it hard. He looked like the conductor of an orchestra. Then there was a sound like heavy rain falling. A great cloud of black things shot across the river. Giovanni leaned a long way out of the window to see better. The empty sky was a beautiful blue. Flock after flock of small birds were flying over. Each one must have contained several thousand birds. They were all crying out as they flew. "The birds are flying away!" Giovanni called from outside the window. "What?" Campanella also looked up at the sky. Just then, the man on the tower suddenly raised the red flag and shook it. Suddenly the flocks of birds stopped coming. At the same time, a strange what kind of sound came from downstream. Then everything went silent for a while. Suddenly the signal man began waving the blue flag again. Migratory birds, they heard him shout, "Now's the time to pass." Migratory birds, now's the time to pass. At once, a flock of tens of thousands of birds flew straight across the sky. The girl put her head out of the window, between Giovanni and Campanella. Her beautiful cheeks gleamed as she looked up at the sky. "Oh, what a lot of birds there are," she said. "And how beautiful the sky is." She spoke to Giovanni, but he was thinking how stuck up she was. He didn't like her at all. He kept his mouth closed as he looked up at the sky. The girl sighed and went back to her seat without saying anything. Campanella pulled his head in from the window. He was feeling sorry for her. He started looking at the map. "Is that man giving instructions to the birds?" the girl asked him in a soft voice. "Yes, perhaps he can see a signal flare that has been sent up somewhere," Campanella answered. He didn't sound too sure. The car went silent. Giovanni wanted to pull his head in from the window, too. But he didn't want to show his face in that bright place. So he stayed where he was and started whistling. "I wonder why I'm so sad," he thought. "I think I should be nicer to other people. Oh, there's a small blue fire burning on the other side of the river. It looks so calm and so cold. Perhaps I could learn how to calm down by staring at it." His head was burning. He pressed both hands against it and kept staring at the fire. "Ah, isn't there anybody who will stay with me forever and ever?" Even Campanella seems to enjoy talking to a girl like that. "I feel so sad." His eyes filled with tears again. The Milky Way now looked like something white far, far away. The train started moving away from the river. It was running along the top of a cliff. There was a black cliff on the other side of the river, too. It was getting higher and higher as the train moved downstream. Giovanni suddenly saw a big corn tree. Under the curly leaves, there were beautiful big green husks. They already had red hairs, and he could see some grains like pearls. Then more and more trees appeared. They stood in a row between the cliff and the tracks. Giovanni pulled his head in from the window. He looked across at the window on the other side of the car. As far as he could see, there were big corn trees under a beautiful sky. They were all swaying in the breeze. The drops of dew at the end of the lovely curly leaves were like red and green flames, or diamonds full of sunlight. "That's corn, isn't it?" Campanella asked. "I think so," Giovanni replied. He was still feeling the same, so he just kept staring out at the fields. Just then the train began to get quieter. It passed some signals and point lights and then stopped at a small station. The pale station clock showed exactly 2 o'clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. The breeze wasn't blowing anymore. The only sound came from the clock. Then, between each tick-tock, a very, very faint melody could be heard. It was coming from far, far away across the fields. The girl looked at the others. "It's a symphony." "It's the New World Symphony," she said softly, as if talking to herself. Everyone else in the car, including the tall young man in black clothes, was deep in thought. "Why can't I be happier in a nice kind of quiet place like this?" thought Giovanni. "Why do I feel so alone? And Campanella isn't being nice to me. He's here on the train with me, but he's only talking to that girl. I'm really sad." He was still staring out of the window, his face in his hands. Then the whistle blew. It was like the sound of cut glass. The train quietly started moving again. Campanella began whistling the Star Traveler's song. "Yes, yes, this area is bad for growing things," said a voice behind them. It sounded like an old man. He was talking as if he had just woken up. "Take corn, for example. You have to dig a hole about 60 centimeters deep for the seeds. If you don't do that, it won't grow." "I see," said another voice. "So it must be a long way down to the river." "Yes, indeed. Between 600 and 1,800 meters. It's a very deep gorge." Thought Giovanni suddenly, perhaps this is Colorado. Campanella was still sitting alone, whistling in a lonely kind of way. The girl was looking in the same direction as Giovanni. Suddenly the cornfields disappeared and a great black plain spread out before them. The New World Symphony was coming out much more clearly from somewhere over the horizon. A red Indian appeared with white feathers on his head. On his arms and chest, he had many stone ornaments. He was running after the train as fast as his legs would carry him and fitting an arrow to his small bow. "Oh, there's a red Indian! Look! It's a red Indian!" The young man in black woke up. Giovanni and Campanella both stood up. "He's running towards us. He's following us." "No, he's not running after the train," said the young man. "He's either hunting or dancing." He was standing with his hands in his pockets. He looked as if he had forgotten where he was. The red Indian did look as though he might be dancing. If he was really running, his steps would have been stronger. Suddenly he stopped. The white feathers fell forward. He shot an arrow straight up and a crane fell from the sky. The red Indian ran forward with his arms held out and caught it. He stood there smiling happily with the bird in his arms and looked towards the train. but his shadow soon became smaller and faded away. 2 telegraph poles gleamed as they went by. Then there was nothing but corn again. Giovanni looked out of the window on his side of the car. The train was running on top of the high cliff. The wide river was shining as usual down at the bottom of the deep gorge. "Ah, we'll be going down soon," said a voice. It was the old man again. "It's not so easy. The train has to go right down to the river all at once. It's so steep, no trains ever come up the other way. See, we're getting faster and faster. Down, 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 down went the train. Every time it was right on the edge of the cliff, the river could be seen shining far down below." Giovanni was beginning to feel brighter. "Oh!" cried Giovanni when the train passed a lonely-looking child standing in front of a small house. Down, 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 down. All the travelers in the car were leaning back and holding firmly onto their seats. Giovanni and Campanella suddenly smiled together. Then they were back next to the Milky Way. It was flowing on strongly right beside the train. It shone from time to time. Pink flowers were blooming everywhere. The train was now running along slowly as though it had finally calmed down. On both sides of the river, they could see flags with a design of a star and a pickaxe. At last Giovanni spoke again. "What are those flags?" I have no idea. The map doesn't show them." "There's an iron boat there, too." "Yes." "Maybe they're building a bridge," said the girl. "Yes. Look, they're engineers' flags. I think they're practicing building bridges. But I can't see any soldiers." Just then, the water of the Milky Way suddenly gleamed brightly. There was a loud bang and the water shot high into the air. "They're blasting!" cried Campanella, jumping for joy. "They're blasting!" The water disappeared. Many large salmon and trout had been thrown up into the air. They watched them fall back to the water. Giovanni now felt so good, he wanted to jump up and down. "It's the Sky Engineering Battalion," he cried. "Wow, those fish were thrown up like this. I've never been on such a fun journey before. I feel so good. I think those trout must be this big if you saw them close," said Campanella. "There are so many fish in the river." "I wonder if there are any small fish as well," the girl said, joining in. "I'm sure there are," said Giovanni with a big smile. "There are big ones, so there should be small ones, too. But we were too far away to see them." He was now in a good mood again. "Oh, I think those are the Gemini shrines," the boy shouted suddenly. He was pointing out of the window. They could see 2 shrines on top of a low hill on the right. They looked as if they were made from small crystals. "What are the Gemini shrines?" "Oh, I've heard about them many times from our mother. I'm sure those are them. She said they were made of crystal and were standing side by side." "Please tell us about them." "Who were the Gemini?" "I know that, of course," said the brother. "They were twin stars. They went out into the fields to play. They had an argument with a crow. Isn't that right?" "No, it's not," replied his sister. "My mother told me that on the bank of the Milky Way." A comet came along going gee foo, gee foo. No, that's a different story. They've gone to sea, of course. No, they haven't. They've already come back from the sea. That's right. I know that. Let me tell you the story. Suddenly, the other side of the river went red. The trees and everything else turned into silhouettes. There was a big red fire in the field on the opposite side. It looked as though it would burn the cold blue heavens. Clouds of black smoke reached high up into the sky. "What kind of fire is that?" asked Giovanni. "What would you burn to produce flames so shining red?" "It's the scorpion flame," Campanella replied. He was looking at the map again. "Oh, I know all about that," said the girl. "What is it?" asked Giovanni. "Well, a scorpion was burned and died, and the fire is still burning today. I heard that story from our father many times." "A scorpion's an insect, right?" "Yes, it is an insect. But it's a good insect." "A scorpion's not a good insect," said her brother. "I saw one at the museum. They have a kind of hook on their tail and you die if they sting you. Our teacher told us." "That's right. But it's still a good insect." Our father told us the story. Once upon a time, there was a scorpion that killed small insects to live. One day, it was found by a weasel. The weasel wanted to eat it. The scorpion tried very hard to escape. But just as the weasel was going to catch the scorpion, a well appeared right in front of it. The scorpion fell to the bottom. It couldn't get out again and began to drown. The scorpion started praying, saying, I don't know how many lives I have killed up to now. But when the weasel was going to kill me, I tried to escape from it so hard. Now I'm in here dying after all. Why didn't I offer my body to the weasel without saying anything? Then the weasel could have lived one more day. God, please look into my heart. Next time, don't throw away my life like this. Please use my body so that other people can be happy." Then the scorpion saw that its body had become a beautiful red flame to light the darkness of the night. Our father said that the flame is still burning. And it must be that fire over there. "I think you're right," said Giovanni. "Look. The signposts around it are in the shape of a scorpion." He could see 3 triangular signposts beyond the big fire. They were standing in line, just like the front legs of a scorpion. And 5 triangular signposts on this side looked like a scorpion's tail and sting. The beautiful red scorpion flame was burning very bright without any sound. It disappeared from view behind the train. Now they could hear a very cheerful medley of various types of music. They could also hear people talking and whistling. And there was a strong scent of grasses and flowers. It seemed they would soon arrive at a town or some kind of festival. "Centaurus, send the dew down on us," shouted the young boy suddenly. He had been asleep next to Giovanni. Now he was looking out of the window on the other side. There was a dark green tree standing there just like a Christmas tree. It was covered in little lights, like thousands of fireflies. Oh, right. It's the night of the Centaur Festival. "Ah, so this must be Centaur Village," Campanella said at once. "Can we play ball toss there?" said the boy boastfully. I'll never miss the targets. We'll soon be at the Southern Cross, said the young man to the children. Please get ready to get off. But I want to stay on this train, the boy replied. The girl stood up, but it looked as if she didn't want to leave Giovanni and Campanella. But we have to get off here, the young man said. He looked down at the boy without smiling. I don't want to get off? I want to ride on this train some more and then get off. Giovanni could no longer stay silent. You can stay here with us. We have a ticket which allows us to go anywhere. But we must get off here, the girl said sadly. Because this is the place that leads to heaven. You don't have to go to heaven. Our teacher told us that we have to create a better place than heaven here and now. But our mother is there, and God tells us what to do. I think a God like that is a fake. No, your God is a fake. No, he isn't. And what kind of God is your God? The young man asked with a smile. Well, I don't know very well, replied Giovanni. But he's not like that. He's the only one real God. Of course there's only one real God. No, I mean he's the only really real God. That's what I'm saying, said the young man. And I pray that we will all soon be meeting the real God. Then he put his hands together. The girl did the same. They all looked sorry to be leaving, and their faces were rather pale. Giovanni nearly started crying. So, are you both ready? Asked the young man. We'll soon be there. Then something happened. A cross appeared a long way downstream. It was standing in the middle of the Milky Way River like a tree. It was covered in bright lights of blue and orange and many other colors. A pale cloud hung over it like a halo. Inside the car, it suddenly became very noisy. Many travelers stood up and started praying, just as they had at the Northern Cross. The air was filled with joyful voices, like the cries of children when they jump on a melon, and also deep sighs. The train moved closer until the cross was right in front of the windows. The pale cloud was moving round very slowly. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! A chorus of happy voices rose from the train. Then, somewhere from the distance in the cold sky, came the clear, pure sound of a trumpet. The train slowed down as it passed many signals. At last, it came to a stop right across the river from the cross. Now we must get off, said the young man. He started walking slowly towards the end of the car, holding the boy's hand. The girl stopped and turned back to look at Giovanni and Campanella. Well, goodbye, then. Goodbye, said Giovanni, trying not to cry. The girl's eyes were open very wide. They showed the pain of parting. Then she turned and left without speaking. The train was now more than half empty. It suddenly seemed very bare and lonely. The wind blew right through it. Giovanni and Campanella looked out of the window. All the travelers who had got off the train were now kneeling on the bank of the Milky Way in front of the cross. A godlike person in white clothes was walking towards them. He crossed over the water with his hands stretched out. But then the glass whistle blew and the train started moving. A silver mist drifted from downstream and the scene disappeared from sight. All the boys could see now were walnut trees with shining leaves. The cute faces of electric squirrels with gold halos appeared from the mist and then disappeared again. Then the mist began to clear. Now Giovanni and Campanella could see a wide road lined with small electric lights. It ran right beside the tracks for a while. The tiny bean-colored lights suddenly went off as the boys passed, as though greeting them. But as soon as they had gone by, they came on again. They turned to look back towards the cross. It now looked small enough to hang around your neck. It was difficult to make out the white beach where the girl, the young man, and the others had been kneeling. They couldn't tell whether they were still there or had already gone along the unknown road to heaven. Ah! Giovanni sighed deeply. Campanella, it's now just the two of us again. Let's go on together, wherever, forever and ever. You remember that scorpion? Well, I wouldn't mind my body being burned 100 times if it made everyone happy. I wouldn't mind either, said Campanella. His eyes were filled with beautiful tears. But what is real happiness? Giovanni asked. I don't know. Anyway, we must do our best to stay happy, Giovanni said. He breathed deeply as if to fill his heart with new energy. Oh, look! The coal sacks. It must be a black hole. Campanella was pointing out of the window. Giovanni looked and was surprised to see a big dark hole in the middle of the Milky Way. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, to try and find out how deep it was and what was inside it. But he couldn't see anything. It just made his eyes hurt. I wouldn't be frightened now, he said, even if I went into such a big dark hole. I would be happy to go and look if it was for everybody's happiness. We'll go on together, Campanella, wherever, forever and ever. I'm sure we will, said Campanella. Oh, look at that beautiful place, he suddenly shouted. He was pointing into the distance. Everyone's gathered there. I'm sure that's the real heaven. Oh, yes, that's my mother over there. Giovanni looked. But he couldn't see anything clearly. Everything was just white. It was nothing like the view Campanella had seen. He felt very sad again as he stared out of the window. Suddenly, he saw two telegraph poles standing side by side on the riverbank. It looked as though their red cross arms were linked together. Campanella, we'll go on together, right? He said, turning back from the window. But Campanella wasn't there. There was only the shining seat where he had been sitting. Giovanni jumped up. He leaned a long way out of the window so that nobody could hear him. He felt a sudden pain in his chest hard and screamed out. Then he started crying. Everything around him had suddenly gone very dark. Giovanni opened his eyes. He felt so tired. His heart seemed to burning in a strange way. And there were tears running down his cheeks. Giovanni jumped up like a spring. Down below him were all the lights of the town just like before. But they looked somehow stronger. He had just been walking along the Milky Way in his dream. And there it was now, hanging above the black horizon to the south. It looked less clearly white than before. The red scorpion star was twinkling beautifully to the right of it. The position of everything in the sky looked almost the same. Giovanni ran down the hill as fast as his legs would carry him. His head was full of the picture of his mother waiting for him to come home for dinner. He raced on through the black pine woods, faster and faster, along the white farm fence, and through the same gate as before to the front of the dark farm. There was a cart there that he hadn't seen earlier. Someone must have come back. "Good evening," Giovanni shouted. "Yes?" A man wearing big white trousers came out at once. "What can I do for you?" "Well, we didn't get our milk today." "Oh, sorry about that," replied the man. He went inside and came back with a bottle of milk. He handed it to Giovanni. "I'm really sorry about that. You see, I forgot to close the calf's pen this afternoon and it got out and drank about half of its mother's milk." He smiled. "I see," said Giovanni. "Well, thank you very much for the milk." "I'm really sorry." "Oh, that's all right." Giovanni left the farm with both hands around the bottle of warm milk. He walked along the track through the trees. Then he came to the main street. He walked for a while and came to the crossroads. To the right, he could see the tower of the big bridge over the river. It was dark against the night sky. That was where Campanella and his friends had gone to float their lanterns. There were groups of women standing at each corner of the crossroads and in front of all the shops. They were all talking about something in a low voice and looking towards the bridge. There were lots of different types of lights on the bridge. Giovanni's heart suddenly felt cold. "What's happened?" he cried out to some people nearby. "A child fell into the river," someone replied. The people all turned to look at him. Giovanni ran onto the bridge. He had no idea what he was doing. It was crowded with people. He couldn't see the river at all. He saw a policeman in a white coat. He went straight to the end of the bridge and jumped down on to the wide, dry part of the riverbed. There were many lights busily moving up and down along the edge of the water. He could also see 7 or 8 lights moving along the dark bank on the other side. Between them, the gray river flowed quietly past. It was no longer lit by the lights of cucumber lanterns. Giovanni could see the clear silhouettes of a group of people downstream on a sandbank. He raced towards them. He suddenly saw Marceau, who had been with Campanella earlier. Marceau ran up to him. "Giovanni," he shouted. "Campanella went in the river." "Why? When?" "They were in the boat." Zanelli was trying to push a lantern towards where the water was faster. But the boat rocked and he fell in. Campanella jumped into the water as well. He pushed Zanelli back towards the boat. Cato grabbed him. "But we can't find Campanella." "Everyone's looking for him, right?" "Yes." Everyone came quickly. Campanella's dad came, too. "But we can't find him. Zanelli's been taken home." Giovanni went over to the area where everyone was standing. Campanella's father was there with pale, sharp chin. He was wearing a black coat. He was standing very straight and looking at the watch he was holding in his right hand. All around him were students and people from the town. They were all staring at the river. Nobody spoke. Giovanni's legs were shaking. He could see many fishing lamps busily coming and going. They lit up the ripples on the black river. Downstream, stretching across the whole width of the river, there was a reflection of the Milky Way. The river looked like part of the sky. Giovanni felt that the only place they could find Campanella was at the far edge of the Milky Way. But other people seemed to think Campanella would suddenly appear from the water, saying, "Oh, I had to swim a lot," or was standing on some sandbank which nobody knew about waiting for someone to come. Campanella's father suddenly spoke in a sharp voice, "There's no hope anymore. It's already been 45 minutes." Giovanni ran up to the doctor. He wanted to say that he knew where Campanella had gone because they'd been walking together. But no words came out. The doctor must have thought Giovanni wanted to greet him or something. He looked at Giovanni for a few moments and then said, "You're Giovanni, aren't you? Thank you very much for helping us tonight." Giovanni could say nothing. He just bowed. "Has your father come back yet?" the doctor asked. He was still holding his watch firmly. "No," replied Giovanni, shaking his head. I wonder why not? He sent me a letter a couple of days ago saying he was doing well. He should have been back by today. Perhaps the ship was late. Giovanni, please visit my place with the other boys tomorrow after school, will you? As he spoke, the doctor was staring downstream towards the reflection of the Milky Way. Giovanni's heart was so full of so many things, he still couldn't say anything. He left the doctor. Now he wanted to take the milk quickly to his mother and let her know that his father was coming home. He ran back across the riverbed towards the town as fast as his legs would carry him.